Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me this morning for our second to last Q&A. And today we're going to be looking at our Zone 1 assignment. And then, yeah, the big final design next go around. So, yeah, it should be an interesting call today. We're going to take a look at, of course, we're going to look at the assignments and then look at any questions anybody may have. I'll just bring up our Q&A doc here. Questions there. Cool. All right, so why don't I share our screen and just take a look at our upcoming assignment. Cool. So yeah, as many of the assignments are set up, this has sort of two parts, and the first is pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And you can see the grades that are assigned to both do represent the certainly the amount of time and effort. Let's see, here go. So yeah, you don't want to be spending a disproportionate amount of time on the building survey. But again, it's quite straightforward. And the feedback I provide to you, I probably won't even touch on this. I'll obviously go through and grade it. But yeah, the main event is the Zone 1 design. So the way the course has been set up is that in our last assignment, we were doing a little plant system design. So we were sort of in a baby step process. So we're just getting our bearings, so to speak, on the design end with a small planting. And now we're going to be looking at Zone 1. And then our next assignment is more of the remaining parts of your project site. So that's one of the intentions of the course, is to sort of slowly integrate this rather than it being all in one go. And from my perspective, with the work I do not do it in the order that's been laid out here. I do not do a Zone 1 design prior to the overall concept. So the reason I'm saying that is just at the end of the course, if you're continuing on with any design work, you might want to, just manipulate this whole process so that it really suits your workflow and makes sense to you. So let us take a look at a Zone 1 assignment. And again, it's pretty straightforward. We're just looking at that inner core of your design. So if you read Bill Mollison's work on permaculture design, which one is it now? Yeah, the designer's manual, which I have right here. Probably won't be able to see it properly, but no. Anyways, highly recommend it. It's not light reading, but it is just packed full of information. So it's a great reference manual, and they still sell it. And I think they're just coming out with a PDF version of it, which would be a little less costly, and maybe if it's PDF, it'd be searchable. So that might be a really good thing to keep your eyes open for. But basically, Bill Mollison with Zone 1, he talks about Zone 1 being, 10 or 15 feet from your residence. So very close to the main activity of your project site, which is traditionally the house or residence. And for him, it's just that little zone around the property. Now, myself, my zone 1, where I live, is a lot different. It is primarily our south and west side of our dwelling, not the north, not the east. We're not there multiple times a day. So you may find that with your own project site, is that it doesn't fall into the typical definition. So we've got a question here. Oh yes, Angie's saying that's a beast of a book. Yes, it is a beast. I've read bits of it. I have not tried to read it cover to cover. But it is a great reference. There's no doubt of that. Yeah, so when we're looking at zone 1, again, it's just that inner core, and we want to think about some of the elements that we'd like to place within that, things that we'd want to have regular access to. And that makes a lot of sense. I did one, had one client who had, I believe they had 3 acres, quite a large house, and existing landscape around it. And they had chickens, which was, I was impressed because they didn't, come across as people that would want chickens, but I think it was their previous owners, chicken coop and chickens. So it was quite funny. Their chicken coop was at the far end of the property. So they had to walk at least 300 feet to go to the coop. And it's a great example of, if you're planning on, say, having small animals like chickens, and you put them that far away, it's, you're creating more work than perhaps you want in terms of just accessing them, because, ideally, for us, we visit our chickens probably 3 times a day. And, we like to be able to keep our eye on what's going around, because we have predator pressure. And so if it's 300 feet away, it makes it a lot harder. And so just keep that in your mind, what elements you're trying to include close to your main residence or your main area of activity. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Let's see what exactly the assignment is asking for, because that, of course, is a given. I would suggest again that everybody take a look at the rubric, right? So this is what I base all the grading on. If you have those items included and done your best on them, that's all we're looking for. But we definitely want to have certain elements included, so please check that out. And if we take a look at the example, which we will, we're first going to have your zone 1, your existing conditions. So what does that look like? And some photos as reference would be great. And you're going to kind of zoom in on that area. I have a couple of questions here, so I'll just push pause on what I was saying. So Tabitha has a question. So you're not the only one who visits them constantly. Oh, you also put your worm bin, right? Yeah, you're quite right. You don't want chickens in your zone 1. I wouldn't ever suggest that. There are a couple things. Chickens actually shouldn't smell, right? So if you're getting odor from your chicken coop, you need more carbon or something in there. We do deep litter, so we only clean our coop out about once a year. And I know people that don't even do that, but there's no smell at all because the carbon keeps getting added. They're about 100 feet from the house. Yeah, well, I would say ours are right at the edge of our zone 1 and zone 2, which, yeah, it's probably 50 feet, somewhere in there. Far enough, but not too far away. Yeah, and then Shannon has a comment here. You don't have permission for what would normally be in zone 1. Vineyard has no building. You're directed to identify. Yeah, Shannon, well, I think I recall when you were starting your project and you showed your property boundaries and your area of interest because you wanted to focus on the orchard or vineyard, and totally get that, totally agree with that. You do have a homestead on the property, so you might want to consider part of that area around it being zone 1. I don't know if that makes sense at all. And you can certainly unmute yourself and chime in, or just throw it in the chat here, whatever works best for you.
Yeah, I don't have permission to, like, roam around there. So yeah. In terms of taking additional photos than I already have or measurements, etc.
Right. Do you have sort of a feel of that area and some documentation of it, or?
I mean, kind of. I can kind of fake it. I just yeah. If that's what you want me to do, I guess I can do that.
Yeah, well, I might suggest, just for the sake of the course and the whole exercise we're going through, you might just want to, even if you don't have any intention of applying um, any design work in and around the homestead, you may just want to consider items that you would, if that was your homestead, what you might include.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused because when we were talking about identifying sites, I think there were also people who had like totally undeveloped,
Yeah.
cut land, and you also
Hmm.
suggested if we're not property owners ourselves, we could do an urban park. So
Yeah.
I'm just a little puzzled about how the assignment,
Yeah.
expectations are for the real diversity of sites that
Sure.
we
Well,
picked. Yeah.
that's a really good question. Um, Typically, if somebody had an undeveloped site, so say it was raw land, there was no building or access or anything. My suggestion at the beginning of the course, before they start developing the base plan, would be to identify a proposed building footprint. So you just consider where a house could be and even an access driveway, and base all of your work around that. Um, the same with a park. I know Chelsea's got a park that she's designing, and she's on the call today. But there's hubs of human activity, right? So there may be a small building, there may be an area that's been designated as a sort of activity area. So it doesn't necessarily, when we get out into public spaces, it's definitely going to be different. But there's, typically some hub of activity that we could call zone 1. Does that make some level of sense to you?
Uh, yeah. Okay. So if we just put those, I mean, I'd prefer to do that for the vineyard because the buildings of the homestead are quite complex, and so I really feel like I'd be faking it. In other words, it's not even a rectangle; it's almost like it's an irregular shape with lots of additions, and the family's dealing with terminal illness right now, and I just do not want to intrude to get additional measurements and such. So it would
Right.
be more useful to me. I mean, I guess that's the question. Is this supposed to be useful to me, or is it that I should make sure that I go through all of the?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last sentence? Sorry, I didn't catch all that.
Is the idea that it should be most useful to me, or
Yes.
that I do what the assignment
Yes.
demands regardless of site conditions? Does that make sense?
Well, I think it would be best to approach this for your own benefit. So if it does, if it's if any thoughts or design ideas around, say, in that zone one, are never going to, never going to be implemented, like, no worries. Yeah, this is just an exercise. And if you're really dialed into the vineyard, that's fantastic. It would be difficult to identify, like if we went back to our zone map in, I think it was lesson 4. Did you identify a zone 1 on your property site? I seem to recall you did, but
Well, in my first pass,
yeah,
I my base map was just the vineyard and surrounding area, and then you asked me to expand it to the
yeah.
entire property, and then that got me into the situation of extreme complexity because there
Uh,
is so much going on, and there are in fact so many different zones, but I can't document them all in the detail, and I don't have access or permission for them all, so it kind of created a tension.
right. Well, do you see a way forward where you could safely document a zone 1 and use it as an exercise versus um, trying to get it 100% accurate for the client? Do you know what I mean?
Uh, yeah, yeah. Like I said, I can fake it. It'll just be a little fuzzy around the edges in terms of details. So
Sure. Well, and even with a zone map, you could question resolution, right? So if you have, say, 10-acre parcel and you're doing a zone map, the resolution of that is going to be only so detailed, because as you zoom in on it, there may be it would change quite a bit. And it's funny, I don't with our work, I don't do any zone mapping. It's something I think it's a really useful um, part of permaculture design, but I think I have it tucked in the back of my head, and I don't document it. It's just another, because every sheet we do, it's costing our client. And I don't actually think in my particular instance, it would be a great benefit for our clients. And that's just the way I work. And everybody's going to be different, but to know, to inherently just have an idea where zone 1 might be is a very useful, and zone 2. So all these things, including zone 5. So you really want to know, areas that are untouched and that you don't want to be um, putting any design ideas to, unless that's your intent, but yeah, I don't know if that helps at all. I would just try and go through the exercise with,
yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I'll send
yeah,
you some notes about where there's lack of resolution, or but I guess I'm feeling a little shell shocked from, as I think are many people, from the last lesson where the demands for detail, or the um, ability to keep expanding into detail just started to snowball and became a massive, um, uh, almost unending
yeah,
project to detail all the plans. So
right.
the question of resolution, how much detail, how many examples to give, rather than doing things to the point of exhaustion and complete resolution. That's um, uh,
Yeah, I
yeah,
totally
yeah,
get it. Um, one of the things that we try and instill in folks is when they're doing that lesson 8 is just to take a small area and do a little planting plan based on that specific area. And it could just be, you know, so for instance, in your situation, you may have just wanted to um, illustrate, 10 or 20 feet of your vineyard row, right? That could have been one of the options for you. Now you did that whole area. So the advantage is now when you go into the final design, you've got a lot of it covered, right? I do, there has been discussion amongst all the instructors that we change up the order a little bit because, you know, personally, when I go through a design, the last thing that I end up doing is planting layout and planting details. I would never do them prior to the concept plan. But, you know, I see the reasoning for placing lesson 8 where it is to get people used to doing some design work. But I think, you know, my
Jamie,
person, oh,
oh, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to +1 that because I felt the same way. Like before I could even think about specific plants, and I didn't even get into the layout of where each of those plants went. I had to take a step back and just create the layout of the backyard and the zones, and I had to define the beds, because how can you develop a planting plan if you don't even know where the beds are? And when I identified the beds, that was based on soil conditions and, you know, light and all of that. So a good chunk of lesson 8 for me was just defining where my beds are and what those different areas are, which was not part of the assignment, I don't believe, not quite.
no. And I think I think it's a great point, and thank you everybody for your comments on this. I'll pass them all along. One of, I guess you're quite right. You have to create bed shapes before you have any plantings. And I guess in the true sense, in some sense of the exercise, you know, there was a case where we want people just to take a couple existing plants and build around them, and then not expand out too far. But for me, it's just the wrong order. And again, it's all these details come at the end, because as you're going through your concept plan, you may actually, you know, make some edits. You know, prior to, let's say you're working for a client and you've done a concept drawing, well, you may be changing that as you go, and then you may have to make more edits after your client has provided you with some feedback. So yeah, it's sort of a backwards order. So I'll definitely continue to pass that along, and I wouldn't be surprised if we change this up a little bit.
Could I make one other
Sure.
design suggestion for this part of the curriculum? What also just felt like too much was that there were these 2 assignments. One was the plant inventory, identifying the native plants and useful plants and
Yeah.
potential guilds, and then doing the design. It could be that you all are, at least for me, underestimating how long it takes to do those plant identifications and
Yeah.
to fill out those tables, which are pretty awkward in the Google slide format.
Yeah.
I'm realizing belatedly I should have just created them in Excel, which would be much more expedient, and then import them, but I was working on a slide template. Anyway, separating those 2 out would have also helped. Like if the prior lesson had asked for the plant guild research, but then a standalone lesson on the detailed design with the beds and the planting zones, that would, from my perspective, have been a little more balanced in terms of time and expectation and mode.
Yeah, well, I agree. You know, and all I can speak of is from my experience, but when I was starting off in this industry, I probably spent at least a decade studying plants, like, and that's all I did. I wasn't married. I didn't have a girlfriend at that time. And I just ate and lived plants, which I wouldn't recommend for everybody. And I guess the point is that is just a huge piece in design, is knowing what materials how they behave, how they interact with each
I'm not,
other.
I love that part. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm just saying time-wise, in terms of time management, have that in a lesson prior to the detailed planting design.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
it
think you'll,
happens ahead just like it happened in your life. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think you'd find, well, I have a little issue with the whole guild thing. But that's a personal experience. I don't, from my perspective, when you place plants together, if you're putting plants together that have similar, um, they like similar conditions. So in other words, you're putting xeriscape plants together versus having some moisture lovers with xeriscape, right? So these are, completely different habitats they like. I think you get into a lot of challenges with that potentially. Um, for the most part, the plantings that we have put together, it's very rare that I see something not performing as expected. And if it doesn't, it's usually attributed to soil conditions or irrigation. So this is why I have a little issue with the whole word of guilds, because I think so many plants are happy to be growing together. Now there are exceptions to that. Walnut is a great one. Where I live, Western red cedar, they do not like or permit a lot of plant material to grow under or around them. So there are exceptions, but yeah, I'll probably get some feedback with that. But and I think it's great to have a model of, hey, you can put these, here's an apple guild, and these plants are really going to be complementary. But the reality is there's just so many more that can do the same sort of performance, but it just takes a lot of time and experience to be playing around with stuff. Yeah, so there's a couple of comments here in the chat. Tabitha, I'm so glad I'm not the only one who felt that way. Okay, that about being overwhelmed there. And Chelsea says you agree with reconsidering the order. Yeah. Zena says she agrees. Still trying to figure out beds and walkways. Yeah, and that again is that bigger concept picture. And Tabitha's saying, yes, actually it was walkways, major paths first, then beds, then plant list, then planting location. And yeah, that's well, I'm going to show you today a couple examples of our workflow, and it's very much what you've outlaid here. And there's no way I could jump into planting details before the big picture. So it's great to chat about this because it's been a recent conversation with instructors, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets shifted around. The other reason it would be valuable is when we get to lesson 10, so the final design, there's no follow-up, right? We're going to have, I will review your work and give you some video feedback, which it's great. It's, but that's it. So it would be wonderful to have it a few lessons earlier when we can have this sort of group meeting and discuss some of that. And yeah, so there's lots of advantages to making some changes there. So thank you very much, everybody, for your input. Let's see here. Oh, Tabitha says she likes the guild idea. Yeah, I get it. If when I became an apprentice, let's say, well, shame. Well, not ashamed. I figured out it was about 40 years ago I started. So that was a little bit shocking to trace it back. But if at that time someone said, hey, here is a bunch of lists of plants that'll work really well together, wow, that would be a huge head start. And there's no doubt of that. It's a good thing to start with. I would just say, my comment would be, don't, restrict yourself to that only. let's see. So Zena has a comment. You give a link to the book. Yeah. Could you give a link to book? I will. Yes, I will, Zena. I'll just have to find my calendar link here. 1 second. There you go. And when you click that link, you'll have a few options. And of course, you want to choose the OSU student meeting. There you go. Yeah, it's a helpful little scheduler. Okay. So let us see, where were we now? I don't know if there's really a whole lot of value for me going through the assignment here or not. Since we have a good sort of conversation rolling here, is there anything that anybody wants to ask a question about or is unsure about?
Question on the elevation plan on lesson 8. I couldn't find good graphics for the plants, so I just drew them by hand.
Yeah.
But I was like looking at the examples, like jaw drop, like where did they find such beautiful graphics with the root systems and everything?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure. I'd have to, that's not part of the template.
Yeah, I couldn't, so I was kind of at a loss, and it was actually hard to show a guild. Well, it was hard to show that elevation drawing by hand because I couldn't really lighten any of the layers.
Yeah, I don't see that here. Yeah, I'm not sure what, you know, if it was me, I would just search for say plant CAD images, side view, something like that. You probably get a whole bunch. Whether those are useful or not, I don't know what format a lot of these are going to be in. The software I use has that built into it, so I don't really have to go searching.
And what are you using again?
I use Vectorworks Landmark, but I
Oh.
wouldn't necessarily.
That's
I
a
wouldn't.
big one.
Yeah, I would not necessarily recommend that. I really enjoy it. I've been using it for about 27 years, and it started out as when it first started, it was called MiniCAD, and that's what I'm used to. I've tried a couple other softwares. I've tried, oh gosh, trying to remember the name of it.
I'm just so frustrated. I'm like completely fatigued with Google Slides. And I'm just feel like I'm ready to pull the trigger on some design software or maybe a tablet so I could at least be drawing.
You have an
Honest.
iPad?
I have a really old iPad. It barely
Mhm.
connects to the internet. It doesn't always. It was free.
Well, one of the softwares I recommend for folks, and I'm sure you've seen this before, is Morpheo Trace. It's I think like $30 a year. So very cheap. You have to have an iPad and an iPencil, but it does a remarkable job for what it is. And you have different layers, and there's a fair bit of graphical assistance with it. You can scale it. It's going to have limitations, but I think for somebody starting and they want to have, sort of a CAD-like feel, I think it has a lot of uses. I know a designer that I kind of collaborate with now and then, and she uses this, and she wanted Vectorworks, but it's just crazy. The price is crazy, and you have to have a pretty robust computer. So to start with, it's, you're all of a sudden putting yourself into a high overhead position, which I wouldn't really recommend. Yeah. So if you can get away with something like that has sort of a tactile feel,
Yeah.
that's, one suggestion. Dynascape, that's one I tried. It's the same kind of thing. They're all going to be, you have to be designing full time for some of these softwares to make sense in terms of the cost, as well as the amount of time you have to put into training on it. So I'm trying to remember what Chelsea uses. She's a landscape architect here on the call. Do you mind sharing that with us, Chelsea?
Sure. I use AutoCAD for my base drawings, and I use SketchUp when I need to translate any of that work into 3 dimensions. So that's what I did my cross sections with. But sometimes it's not time worthy to take it all the way into SketchUp and model there. So sometimes I just sketch or draw completely in AutoCAD or hand sketch and then scan that and bring it in to whatever the final presentation version is. And I agree, Google Slides is just a final depository for what I've been doing. And a large part of my presentations have been images created outside of that and then brought in to this.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, Chelsea. I totally agree. It's really kind of a viewport, so to speak. It's not to work within, not easy to work within anyways. So that's one of the challenges with this course, is having this sort of universal platform where we can exchange files easily. And, the Google Slides ticks a lot of those boxes and hopefully gets people thinking about how they would better articulate their ideas. And, some people are really good with hand-drawn work, and I'm envious of that. I can't do that very well myself. So I definitely rely on a computer for assistance. But yeah, that's really great information here. There's a couple of things on the chat here. So Shannon had a comment. So yeah, lesson 8 example. So professional detail probably done with AutoCAD. We also have a problem with coming close to the image. And it took an immense amount of time and awkward to copy and paste. Yeah, it certainly can be that way. So Zena's asking for a good tutorial on Vectorworks. Well, they have, yeah, like I say, I would not necessarily recommend. And that's funny because I do enjoy it, but that company has changed over the years too. One thing they do have, which I can show you here, is they have a fantastic little help hub, a forum that's really useful. Not sure why it's not loading. If you buy a subscription to Vectorworks, you do get access to what they call the Vectorworks University, which is, here's their forum here. So this is a really useful place. When I probably check on this a couple times a week just to continue to learn more. And if you do have trouble, it's a great place to post questions for others to answer. But I'm not sure. If you went to, I think if you go on to YouTube, there would be, let me just see. There is one member that does quite a bit of work on tutorial work. Yeah, if you go into YouTube and just Google Vectorworks, you're going to get, there he is. No, it's not him. Yeah, this is one here. I'll just transfer this.
That's okay. I can do some digging. I was just wondering if you had like a good intro starting
Yeah.
point.
There you go. So if you go onto YouTube and you look at this fellow's channel, Jonathan Pickup, he's an instructor. He's not gonna there'll be lots of just helpful little tips here, but it's a pretty deep dive in terms of learning the, probably take you a year, I would think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. What's this
Yeah.
guy's name?
Jonathan Pickup. Yeah. So he's on the forum quite a bit. And he's certainly looks like that's, I think, a big part of his work is also offering tutorials for folks, one-to-one, one-on-one or group tutorials. But he has a lot of teaser videos here, stuff you could get started on anyways.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So Zena's been using Illustrator. Yeah, Adobe Illustrator. Yes, I know people that use that. Yeah, Photoshop. Chelsea mentioned she uses Photoshop. Yeah, and we don't want, I guess that's the funny part about this course is, burnout. And if you are a designer, say you're in Chelsea's shoes, you're a designer and you come into this course, you still have a lot of content to go through. And then I imagine the exercises are pretty straightforward in terms of the, putting out that information onto paper or onto a file and getting them loaded into your Google Slides. But if you've not done this before, that is where it can get quite cumbersome. And we ran into this challenge before when it was just a PDC. It was a 10-week course, so every week you had an assignment due, and we saw a lot of people drop out. So the template got expanded slightly and then pushed out over 20 weeks. And the regular PDC is a condensed version of this. And it's every week that you have to hand in assignments. So it's tricky with this, trying to find a balance where I found that with most students, if you get past lesson 5, so if you submit lesson 6 on your soils, most people that get to 6 are going to go to the end of the course, but the first half of the course can be a little bit tricky for a lot of people, and demanding in terms of time, and some people just don't have it. You've got a few hours a week, but you don't have 10, right? So I really appreciate everybody's feedback, and it's all part of making the course better for the next round of students, and also it's impossible for it to be a perfect fit for everybody, but you do want people leaving with, feeling like they've gotten a lot of value and they want to continue on practicing this work. And I do think it's a good starting point for a lot of folks. I wouldn't expect you would go through this course and come out the other side feeling 100% confident designing. You probably find that it's going to take many more designs practicing. Maybe you're doing them for a reduced cost or working with somebody else that's in the field that you're going to learn from. And so yeah, it's a great place to start, but there's so much to learn and it never stops. That's been my experience. So I know I started out in the parks, and then kind of shifted my focus to residential and then larger. And now my interest is really in, larger homesteads and agricultural properties. So there's always something new out there. Yeah. So is there, let's just see, Zena posted a question here or a statement. So she's really enjoyed the course structure. You love the ability to submit Google Slides, each lesson instead of separate documents. Yeah. One suggestion is to label those slide docs as lessons instead of assignments. Yeah, that's a good point. It is a little bit confusing that way. I would agree with you. Thank you for that, Zena. Yeah, and we've got about 12 minutes left in the call. Is there anything else anybody would like to go over? I'm happy to do that. I can share you a couple of examples. You may have seen some of them already, but okay. Let me just, we're gonna switch our screen here. Got a couple examples I can show you. All right. You may have seen this one before, I'm not sure, but it just gives you an idea of our workflow. So when we put this particular base plan together, we had a drone survey done and we just overlaid some of our base plan work on top of that. We also have some contour information that you can't really see in this image. And basically we start with water. So depending on, our client and what they're trying to achieve, that's going to be, primary here. This client, they have a nice metal roof on their residence and their shop. So they were all about collecting and storing rainwater because where I live, this area typically gets an abundant amount of rainfall during the summer, or sorry, I wish, abundant amount of rainfall. And then in the summer, we can be horribly dry, 3 or 4 months of no rain. So storing rainwater is a really good idea if you're trying to grow food or support a landscape. And that's what this was all about. We have a bunch of calculations here. And these are based on collecting off of different roof surfaces, different storage options, and the best, of course, would be if we're collecting off both the house and the shop. But in this case, we just went with the shop, knowing that they'd have to supplement some of their water. And the calculations are pretty easy. On average, where I live, you're going to have, you're just going to calculate one inch of rain or 1 inch of irrigation water per week. That's a easy average. That's not necessarily the case for an annual vegetable garden, but for a regular landscape, that's tons if it's established. Let's see here. So after we do water, so what we do, we create this and then we'll have a Zoom meeting with our client and say, this is where we are, this is what we've come up with. And we don't expect any feedback. Sometimes we get it at this point, and sometimes it's towards the end. So these, at least this way, it's very inclusive and they get to see how things get developed. So our next step was our access, and that was really all about a small patio near the house. So a warm place to sit in the spring and the fall, because I get a lot of cool breeze off the water here, and that's not, and that's very cool traditionally in the shoulder season. We did some expanded parking area for guests, and we have a passive solar greenhouse over here with rainwater behind it, rainwater cisterns behind it. And then we moved to the soil layer where, you know, we're going to enhance planting behind this parking area. We're going to renovate an existing bed here and then soften the front of the house that had just been newly renovated, and a little bit of a sort of privacy, cozy planting around this patio surface. So that all overlaps onto each other, and this is how we come up with the initial concept. And then we look for some feedback. I don't think I have the final concept on this file here. But then we start looking at details. So this would have been your lesson, you know, this resembles lesson 8, where we're looking at specific plant locations and specific types of plants. So as you can see, this comes after all of that concept has been put in place, and we know the bed shapes, and we know where we're having to renovate or add to, which was in this area. We're just adding some material to some existing beds. And over here, we're doing a native planting, whereas we had originally, they wanted a veggie area. So we had that, but they wanted to go back into more native. Yeah, and then we just had a few details. We used we didn't actually, we installed this landscape without this infiltration area here, this parking. Homeowner wanted to look out the house at a green parking area. So this came up, this core grass grid. It's like a honeycomb grid, and you have a compacted gravel base, and you have, in this case, we were going to hydro seed. So you put a special blend of topsoil in the grid, and then you can either lay turf on it or you can hydro seed it. So you end up with a very firm, freely infiltrating parking area, which is an unusual product. You see them used in parks occasionally, and we didn't get around to putting that in. So I'm not totally heartbroken about that. This was going to a lot of preparation, and whenever you're doing something new, it's always tricky to provide pricing for that. And then flagstone patio, and this is the sort of look we were after. We wanted wide joints, you know, wide spacing between each piece, so we could get some vegetation in there, maybe some woolly thyme, something like that. But again, this is really not an easy thing to achieve when you're trying to put some hardscape down, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But these people wanted this for the look, and I don't think they were that's really asking a lot of the plant material, right? To be growing in this compacted near dead zone. But yeah, that's traditionally what we'll offer. I got one more little urban drawing I can show you here. And here we start out with our sector compass and then our water plan. So this is a small urban lot in the city. So we were going to, there's a little bit of overland flow from a neighbor's property. We're going to try and pick that up and slow it down in a basically like a swale trail. So it was going to be a wood chip path with some perforated piping in it, so that if it got overwhelmed, it could run into this little rain garden, a very small rain garden. It was really cutting the edge of what would work here. And I'm going to collect rain off of this outdoor kitchen area and store it into some IBC totes, which they have. So we wanted to make use of that. So after the water, we looked at access, which was really just all about circulation. They were going to put a guest house on this property for like an in-law suite. And they wanted this kind of central outdoor fire pit and cooking area that was covered. That was close to the house. And then we did the soil there. So they want to grow their own veggies. This was all going to be basically food forest and perennial and medicinal plants. There's some existing plants here. And that is what we have in terms of a final concept. And this was going to be a do-it-yourself. So they're going to do all the work themselves. So we did a series of planting plans here, and it's kind of hard to see, but we basically did the trees and shrubs on the left and the perennials on the right. Just to make it a little easier, well, A, for labeling, and B, for just seeing how much structure we're getting from those woody plants versus the herbaceous. Yeah, and then just a little bit of detail here on their outdoor area, their little patio. It's going to be very simple. And a tiny little rain garden. And this little swale to try and slow water down. So those are the kind of things that we will provide. And Sean's asking, could you touch briefly on the plantings in the swale trail? Yeah, there weren't any plantings in that. So what it is, it's basically a 3-foot wide walkway that's wood chip, but we've dug down and made it like a trench, so probably a foot down. And then we'll put perforated pipe in there as an overflow option, so that if we're getting a certain amount of water building up, it's got somewhere to go. But it's the wood chips, they're a fantastic combination with this sort of structure, in that they will break down over time, and then every couple of years you're just going to replace the wood chips. I've used them before. Really, they've worked out really well. So there's no planting in there. It's benefiting the plants downhill or downslope from it. And Zena had a question here. Any examples of how you incorporate natural indigenous building integration? Wow. Yeah, I don't have any of those I can show you, Zena. Sorry. Yeah, I have lots of examples. There's no doubt of that. I've been going through them lately, just for a course that I'm currently doing. And yeah, it's quite amazing going through 27 years worth of work, and the difference, just the graphical difference from when I started to now. And yeah, it's very interesting stuff. We never used to prioritize water, So it is very, very, yeah, it's really nice to get to a point where we're making best use of all the resources on our site. All right. Well, I think that's about it in terms of our time. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up today? Or even any thoughts of what you might want to talk about in the next Q&A? That's our final Q&A.
I think at some point, just I'm getting pretty, well, not to be dramatic, but I think I have quite a bit of anxiety that I'm not feeling prepared to start applying this to,
Right.
you know, in a professional sense, because this is the
Right.
professional version of this course. So I think most people here are looking to make a living around this in some sense.
Sure.
And so I think I'm just really unclear about sort of like what the path forward is going to look like. This lesson 8, while it was a total beast, actually made me feel better because I think it got me in a sense, it got me back into designing and actually applying everything that we've learned.
Mhm.
And I could start to see some changes based on all this curriculum in terms of, I think, making me a better designer, but it still is just like a fraction of what I feel like I need to be prepared. So
Yeah.
will the rest of the course start to take us more in that direction?
Well, we're
Because I
definitely,
feel a lot has been analysis up until this point, learning how to really analyze a site.
yeah. And I think that's one of the big takeaways with permaculture design is its emphasis on site analysis. You got to have that in order to design effectively. You know, next steps in terms of from this course, I would not expect the average person, this is just my personal point of view, I wouldn't expect the average person at the end of this course to feel comfortable going out and working professionally just based on what they've learned here. I'd say this is a great starting point, especially given you're getting, you know, you have assignments, you're getting some feedback, so there's that component's really valuable. Everybody's going to be at a different point in their learning, and we've been talking about next steps in terms of some sort of mentorship, and that's been discussed for quite a while. Javin Bernakovich and myself talked about doing that. That hasn't happened yet formally, and I know it's been discussed with the OSU instructors, so it's kind of, you know, a bigger picture with them, and we do see a need for it. It just hasn't materialized in terms of how we can support people beyond this course to feel more confident and to move forward with, you know, their desire to do this professionally. From my perspective, if somebody was to ask, you know, what's a good next step for me, I guess some of it would depend on whether they want to design or design and build, because those are different. If you want to be in the field executing your designs or designs by others, I think that a really good next step might be considering finding an ecological designer that you want to work with for a little while, and maybe you can be involved with a project or two. And that's certainly something that we have done in the last few years. We haven't done an installation for about a year, just with family dynamics going on. We had 4 family members die in the last year, so that's kind of redirected our energies a little bit. But we don't have a crew now, so I had 2 or 3 people that would come in and just help with projects, and they would learn a lot, and I would get, you know, really high quality labor from them, and it was a win-win for everybody. They got a really good wage, and that worked very well for my situation, but that's because we're not installing on a full-time basis. We used to, and we used to have a crew and equipment and all that sort of stuff. We're just not interested in doing that anymore. But if you can find somebody that you could work with for a season, you may find that your takeaways are just enormous, right? You learn
Yeah.
on somebody else's job.
Right.
Because, you know, I would say with the installation, there's always modifications that have to happen. There's always challenges that are coming up, and it is really valuable to see that happen.
Mhm.
And I quite like change on a job, provided it's not too drastic. So yeah, that would be something you might want to consider, because having gone through an apprenticeship, I went through a 4-year apprenticeship, and all I did was, you know, literally totally embedded in that world. And after 4 years, I wasn't ready. It took me 10.
Sorry, that's funny. I laugh. Yeah, because I did this a long time ago, and it's just like there's still so much to learn. It's amazing, especially around the area of installation.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a large and that's very dynamic, right? So one project is completely different to another, and yeah, there's a lot to learn. And that's where it's good to learn on the back of somebody else, right? So you're not putting yourself out there. You know, the things that my wife and myself did at the beginning of our career, beginning of our installation career on the island here, they were just insane. I agreed to some of the jobs that I agreed to do. There's no way I would think twice now, because I know how much time and energy goes into them.
Yeah.
So when you're younger, you can, you know, do 12-hour days every day, and that you can do that okay. I can't happily do that now. So yeah. So look for somebody in your area that maybe they just need somebody to help with designing, right?
Yeah.
And you're almost like a subcontractor.
Yeah.
I'm trying to set up a little bit of an arrangement with that, with a person here where I live, where they're doing installation work and they don't have enough time to do everything. So I'm like, well, I can do some designs for you, and you can do the install, and then, you know, can certainly help you with any problems that come up. But that makes them feel a little more comfortable, because they don't have a huge background with the installation end of it. So yeah, there's so many ways you can go, but the mentorship is a big thing that we've been talking about, and I can certainly see a need for it. It's just trying to formulate it so it's valuable for everyone. And that is one of the challenges. What you need and what Zena needs, you know, might be quite different. Yeah.
One
So
more suggestion really quick is if the school could arrange any sort of like field trips, and I know we're spread out, I think between Oregon and Washington and maybe, you know, and into Canada and further, but if something like that ever came up, that would be really helpful to start seeing some of these permaculture design spaces.
yeah, and I think like for instance, the course that we're halfway through right now, I believe Nancy's taking it. It's aesthetic design for ecological landscapes. So the last session we're doing is going to be on case studies. So I'm going to walk through at least one project from the beginning through the design, through all the construction. And that's something we just don't get into at all with this course, but it may be too much, right? I mean, It may be too much for this course, but beyond that, maybe there's a really interesting opportunity for kind of virtual learning when it comes to that construction end, just some real basics. But there's a reason this horticultural program I took was 4 years, right?
Yeah.
It takes a long time. You have to see a lot of different things, and you have to experience a lot of plantings and observation. And that's something, in particular with permanent plantings, you don't really see the results. You'll see some in that first year, and then it's year 2 and 3, when things should really get going and explode, so to speak. And if they don't, then you're digesting, why is that? What could I have done differently? And so, yeah, hence it taking a lot of time. I'm sure that Chelsea would say a similar thing with her design work, and I'm sure in landscape architecture, she'll be producing designs probably for commercial and public spaces, and then be involved with overseeing, the tenders and the execution of them, which would be very difficult because somebody else has got their hands in the installation and you've got to stand back a bit. But do you have anything you want to add to that, Chelsea?
No, I agree absolutely. It's multifaceted, depending on kind of the tier, the sector that you get into. Just working on public projects, there's the whole working with contractors, working with low bid contractors, and then also, like when I worked for the park district, working with the people who actually maintain those projects. They have a stake in the game, and of course, the larger public. But I also underscore what Jamie said about you don't know, you really don't understand even something that you install this year. You won't really understand and get to know until 10-12 years down the line. That's when you actually like, yes, it's finally arrived, so it's a long game.
Yeah, well said. I really appreciate everybody's input today. It's been a great conversation, which I'm going to have to terminate. We've gone over a little bit, and just to touch on some of the chat that was, let's see here. Let's see. Okay, so Sean, you agree so much of this about existing in the physical world? Yes, absolutely. And Zena said, definitely, I would even pay for that. Nancy said she's enjoying the course that's going on. That's great. And Sean, I think in lieu, we could organize ourselves locally to find sites to visit. Yeah, definitely. I think that's totally doable. It would be impossible to run a field trip with this course because I can't leave where I am. I have a 91-year-old mother that we're looking after that's got some challenges. So I have a hard enough time just going out for dinner. But I'd love to do some traveling and go through some landscapes. That is a lot of fun. That's one thing about some of the architectural organizations. I know we used to be a member of the, oh gosh, what was it called? That's terrible. I've forgotten the name of it. This is a Landscape Designers Association, well known. It'll come to me. But they have annual meetings, and then they put on all these field trips. And there was one in Seattle we went to. It was way back. It was probably in 2005 or 6. And wow, that was so fun. That really was fantastic, especially in our situation where you tend to, at least at that time, we were so embedded in these long projects. One took 3 years, a couple took a year. So all you see is your own work, and it gets, you know, you need to see new things. At least I do. I love seeing other people's work. And even in this context where all of you are creating designs on paper, I mean, for me, that's fantastic. But seeing it in person is a great option. Gosh, I wish I could remember the organization's name, but I'm sure it'll be very similar to what Chelsea would be involved with. I'm sure there are landscape architectural groups that, and I know the American Society of Landscape Architects, you should check out their website if you, any of you haven't already, and you go under their awards section. My gosh, some of the work that's being done out there is just truly remarkable. And I really have seen myself over the last 20 years. Certainly, it appears that landscape architecture is really shifting over and making better use of water and way more care and concern with the resources that are around us, rather than sort of imposing one's will on the landscape. So, yeah, it's so you might want to check out that. ASLA.org, I believe, is the web address. Okay, and Brina's got a comment here, and then we are going to thank you, Tabitha, through the link in the chat here. Let's see. Okay, Brina, would it be possible to compile a list of permaculture design states by state? Wow, yeah, that would be a big project for someone to do. Yeah, I'm sure it is possible. Yeah, that would be quite a job, but it's a good idea. One of the challenges with some of the work we've done has been on larger private properties and from private people, right? They don't want to expose their properties for others, but certainly a lot of people would be interested in that. So great idea, Brina. Okay, well, I'm going to have to go. Thank you all very much for the great conversation today, and look forward to seeing your work. And yeah, and also look forward to our last meeting in a couple of weeks. So we'll pick this up then. And yeah, everybody have a great week, and thank you again very much. We'll see you all later.